Starting with chapter 3, Job begins our first cycle of speeches. We're told that 7 days have passed. I assume that means 7 days have passed since the second trial. I don't know if we can determine how long has passed since the first trial. But with that, you've got to admit that in the heat of a moment, as something's happening, you're, like we just talked about, you're in post-traumatic stress. Now, once 7 days have passed, you've had time to consider. You've had time to think about things. You've had time to begin to formulate, where do we go from here? You know? And so I think that's something that we can't overlook in this time period. That the friends have arrived. They've sat quietly, which is probably a good thing to do when somebody is going through something. You just being there is probably better than advising them. I'll tell you a quick story. There was a tragedy out at the Oregon church before we got to the Oregon church. Somebody fell into a barbecue pit and got severely burned. Somebody had the audacity to tell the mom of that kid, well, God was probably punishing them for something. Why would you ever say that to somebody? Anyways, so now Job is going to begin in poetic fashion to curse the day of his birth, to curse the day of his conception. Job is depressed. He has reached a level of depression here in chapter 3 that is very bleak, that is very without hope. It's actually kind of difficult to read when you consider what's happened to him, and this is his state of mind. Interesting thing, though, that from the text we should assume, I believe that we can accurately assume, that up until first test and second test, Job's had a pretty good life. Job, I'm not saying that he's never encountered a flat tire before. I'm not saying that that's never happened before, but I am saying things have gone apparently very well for his entire life. Then these two tests happen and suddenly everything has gone to pot. Everything is bad. God is bad. Life is bad. How quickly we join Job here in chapter 3. How quickly we forget the good times and focus only on the bad times. We forget the good times and we focus only on what's going on here in the moment. Let those who curse the day of my birth. This is probably not unlike Balaam. This is our second reference here in our class to Balaam. Balaam had some sort of special ability to curse people in the name of Yahweh, despite the fact that we shouldn't assume that he's an Israelite. We shouldn't assume that he's a Hebrew. But he's some form of a professional curser that you pay to have him come curse people. And that's the reference that Job is using here. Those who do curses, let that day of my birth be cursed. He refers to Leviathan here in chapter 3. This is not our only reference to this Leviathan thing. Some people have wondered, is this a reference to some sort of prehistoric beast, some sort of dinosaur or something of that nature? I'm going to say it's possible. However, we do know from other texts that Leviathan at least was recognized as some sort of mythical sea creature. Some sort of mythical beast that pulls ships down and drowns men and does horrible things. Interestingly, I pointed out earlier that Satan has disappeared from our story. Leviathan is going to pop back up later in our story. Is Satan and Leviathan, is that a reference? I don't know. Could be. Especially when God speaks about him. Interesting view of death that Job has. Death, from this point in Job's theology, there's no afterlife in any kind of life sense after death. The place of the dead isn't presented as some kind of a heaven. It's not presented as some kind of a hell. It's presented as the place that all people go to. Kings and princes as well as babies. The sinner, the prisoner, the great, the small, the slave. They're all there. And they're all in some state of rest. They're all in some state, the slave no longer hears the demands of the taskmaster and things of that nature. So at this point, Job looks at the grave as a refuge, a place where nothing happens, nothing goes on, and everybody is at rest. Job uses a phrase here in chapter 3 that God has hedged me in. But that's not the first time we've heard that word hedge, is it? Back in chapter 1, Satan accused God of, you've hedged him in and only protected him. Here, Job describes the hedging, though. He's accusing God of hedging him in almost kind of like a trap or a prison or a maze in order to punish him. This can indicate that a person's perspective will inform their interpretation of God. A person's perspective will inform their interpretation of God. And it's at that point that we have to hit the pause button and go, but is that interpretation valid? Now, once again, let's not judge Job too quickly. We have all of revealed Scripture. Job only seems to know bits and pieces of the Genesis account. Verse 26 of chapter 3, verse 26, I have or I had. Perfect tense, already accomplished. It's interesting when you look at Job's words. You've got to read them and you've got to understand them in the day that he's speaking. Remember, this is day 7. And now he's going to say that turmoil and trial is going to come. Is this a reference to what's about to happen, the dialogue and argument between Job and his friends? Or has he given up hope that anything good could ever come now? My life, this is my life now. I'm going to sit in dust and ashes for the rest of my life, and it's only going to be turmoil. I already pointed that out, that it seems that Job has forgotten all that God has done. He's given up hope. And that's a tragic place to be. That's a hard place to be. Now Eliphaz, our first speaker, is going to speak. And Eliphaz asks a question. He asks, where were the righteous destroyed? One of the things that we have to realize that the book of Job is going to use is rhetorical questions. Rhetorical questions are something that we still use today, and we have to ask ourselves, how do we use rhetorical questions? When you're using a rhetorical question, the point is not to get your person to answer yes or no. The point is to get them to think about the question. Because rhetorical questions obviously have a yes or no answer. That's not the purpose of the rhetorical question. It's to get the person thinking about things. So when Eliphaz here asks this question, he's not actually expecting Job to answer it, nor is he expecting the audience to answer it. He's trying to get this ball rolling, this thought going. And now, karma would be a good way to describe Eliphaz and the rest of the friends' theology. Karma in the sense that benefit is gained from past helpful actions. Disadvantage or encumbrance results from negative actions. Now, this is a concept that even if you've never heard of Buddhism or Hinduism, you've heard of karma, and you've heard of this kind of attitude, this kind of action. Do good things happen. Do bad things happen. Pause. Is that true-ish? Is it false-ish? Is it really one or the other? It's kind of a very broad and vague concept, and you can point to examples on either side, but simply because you can point to examples on either side, does that then somehow make it a universal law? The law of gravity is a universal law, isn't it? At least here on planet Earth, right? Can we always say of something, you did something good, so something good is going to come of you, for you. You did something bad is going to happen to you. Why do we have a phrase then in English, no good deed goes unpunished? I mean, that's a phrase that we've had. It's been around for years. We use it, right? I think that phrase itself challenges karma, and we haven't even gotten into theology yet. Do good things happen? Do good things happen. Do bad things happen. What we have here is a case of backwards thinking, working backwards from a result. Is this the case sometimes? Is it always the case? We could call this the fallacy of a false cause. The conclusion, the correlation between there is correlation between A and B, therefore A is the cause of B. Correlation does not mean causation. Now, you might think for a moment, wait a minute, Ozzy, we've left the book of Job and we've entered logic. We've entered philosophy. Well, yes, we have done that because Job's friends are going to offer philosophical ideas. They're going to wrap them in theology, but that's really what's going on here. We're trying to figure out life. We're trying to figure out all our aspects of life. And so we give into things like this. Now, all factors need to be taken into account. Now, here's the problem. Is this real? Does this happen? It happens all of the time. It happens every day. People see event A happened, event B happened. A must have caused B. And the problem is that the only data that we have? We have to look at all of the data when it comes to making certain assertions, especially when it comes to people suffering. Now I ask you a question. So-and-so has smoked their entire life. They picked it up when they were a teenager. They've smoked 2 packs a day. They get lung cancer. I want to ask you an honest question. Are you surprised when they come to you and they say, I got lung cancer? No, you're really not too surprised. It's pretty much common knowledge these days that smoking leads to lung cancer, isn't it? Let me ask you a very personal question. Do you know somebody who got cancer and it wasn't you smoked, you got lung cancer? It wasn't you drank and you got lung cancer. It was that random cancer, right? Those random cancers exist, don't they? Where even doctors who have years and years of experience in cancer, they go, we don't know. So, we, standing here today, there are those occasions. The smoker who got cancer that we're not... Actually, we're a little more amazed by the smoker who didn't get cancer. They exist, actually. They've lived to be 103 for some reason. They smoked every day of their life. Why? I don't know. It goes to that. So, Eliphaz and the rest of them are going to make this assumption, this false cause assumption. We've got to keep in mind that here we have that information that they didn't have. We have chapter 1 and chapter 2. We know that Satan is involved in this. We know that God is allowing this. And therefore we know as we read, Job is not being punished for something that he did. And we have to remember that when we read Eliphaz, when we read Bildad, when we read Zophar, we have to look at when they say something, is what they say true? Now, does anybody happen to know one book in the New Testament mentions Job? Anybody know which book in the New Testament mentions Job? James. How'd you guess that, James? One book in the New Testament quotes the book of Job. Any guesses on which book quotes the book of Job? No, not James. Good guess. 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians quotes the book of Job. Guess who is quoted in the New Testament? Eliphaz. In this very speech, Eliphaz is quoted in the New Testament. Have you heard this theory of understanding the book of Job? What the author says, what God says, and what Job says is true, and what everybody else says is false. That is a very simplistic reading of the book of Job. And I told you at the beginning, Job, the book, is not going to hold your hand and walk you through it. You're going to have to work your way through the book of Job. And Eliphaz is quoted as scripture in the New Testament, meaning we can't just discount the friends. When the friend says something that matches the rest of Scripture, guess what we're obligated to do? we're obligated to agree with them. And in some cases, all three of the friends have what I would call good theology, defining good theology as the rest of Scripture agrees with that point. But that doesn't mean that everything they say is right. That's one of the challenges. That's one of the problems with the book of Job, that we have to read it almost line by line and stop after almost every line and go, is that true? Or is that false? All characters are unaware of God in Satan's exchange. All come to the issue with personal understanding, experience, and prejudices. Guess what? Nothing's changed. We today still do that. We come to absolutely every circumstance with our understanding, with our experiences, and with our prejudices. I love this quote by N.T. Wright. Those of you who don't know who N.T. Wright is, he's one of my favorite authors. No point of view is nobody's point of view. Just want you to think about that for a moment. No point of view is nobody's point of view. Basically, there is no such thing as objective. Now, there's such thing as more or less objective, but there's no such thing as objective, because objective would mean, why would you even be there listening to it? You don't care about anything. Beware of our own presuppositions. This is so important. I think that we can learn tons from the book of Job. I think we can learn from what happens to Job. I think we can learn from the outcome. But I also think that we can learn from what the friends are saying. You and I make assumptions every day. Are our assumptions valid? Are our assumptions valid? This kind of understanding, it's still extended into the New Testament. Remember, Jesus, John chapter 9, the disciples asked Jesus, was this dude born blind because of his parents' sin or because of his sin? And Jesus said it doesn't work like that. Another place in Luke, Galileans that were killed by Pilate. Jesus asks, do you think these Galileans were more evil than all the other people who weren't killed by Pilate? We can fall into this trap so easily, this kind of thinking so easily, that bad things happen because you're a bad person. Bad things always follow bad people. Now, once again, it's not that we can't see cause and effect. It's not that cause and effect don't exist. For example, you get paid. You take your paycheck and you blow it on cigarettes and booze and gambling and all sorts of things. And then you don't have the money to pay your rent. Is cause and effect evident there? I think it is. But there are other cases, there are other things that we can't make those assumptions. We can't leap to conclusions without more details. That's one of the critical things that all three of the friends and Elihu do. They jump to conclusions. I know how the world works. Let me explain to you how the world works. I'll show you how foolish you are. You'll see my wisdom. I'm saying this, and the whole time I believe this, by the way. That was sarcasm. Eliphaz has figured out how the world worked. He gained this from existential revelation. You read this part. I was in a dream state, and a ghost passed before my face, and a personal external revelation. There you see, I question where exactly it begins and ends. That's one of the problems with the book of Job and translating the book of Job. Does a thought begin at this verse and end at that verse, or is that part of that? It's so complicated, right? You guys read it. You guys went several times. You were talking about this, and now you're talking about that. What'd you do? Eliphaz has figured out, also through empirical investigation, that this is how God works. God works by karma. And that is where Eliphaz plants his feet. That is where Eliphaz says, this is how God works. I will instruct you on how God works. Now, once again, there are cases. Read the book of Proverbs and you'll see the author of Proverbs talking about the fool. And we can see in those passages, oftentimes, he's dead right. I love the proverb, only a fool meddles in the affairs of other people. Now you've got to admit, you've seen two people arguing and you've thought to yourself, I should get involved in this. Bad idea, especially if they're two women. But we do still need to be aware of when we judge, how are we judging? Are we judging based on presupposition or are we judging based on fact? I pointed that out. I must have gotten ahead of myself. Eliphaz is not a dualist, and that's very important that we see throughout this book. Now, dualism would be something that wouldn't influence Israel for several hundred years after the book of Job. And dualism is something that there's a good God and there's a bad God-ish, maybe a lesser God, but they're in some kind of cosmic struggle. You see this sometimes now presented as God and Satan, almost as if Satan is God's equal in this eternal struggle, which is definitely not Bible, definitely not correct. We saw that, here once again we see that Eliphaz, actually I agree with him to a certain extent, and that all things come from God. And I don't think that he's wrong about that. He has monotheism. He has that embedded in him, and I don't think he's wrong. There we get the Pauline quote that I mentioned. We need answers that have explanatory power. We just do this all the time. The world doesn't make sense, does it? A few head nods there. The world doesn't make sense. We think we figured out. When I was 18, I had the world figured out. Oh my gosh, I wish I was that smart still today. I think there's a country song about that. We need to consider all the evidence. We also today need to consider the Word of God. Again, I've given these guys a bit of a pass every time because they don't have all of Scripture. We have to balance everything going on with all of Scripture. Job speaks, chapters 6 through 7, and Job enters good company, if you ask me. Oh, that the Lord would just kill me. Oh, that the Lord would just wipe me out. That's very similar to something Moses said. That's very similar to something Elijah said. Job, he compares his suffering to bad food. I found that a very interesting comparison. I don't want to eat my food. My food is even making me suffer. Again, I got a little ahead of myself here with rhetorical questions, but once again, Job asks a terrific rhetorical question here. Chapter 6, verse 12. Is my strength like stone? Is my flesh like bronze? Well, obviously the answer to that is no. So what is Job asking when he asks the question, is my strength like stone? Is my flesh like bronze? Can I endure? Can I make it through this? Why is God doing this? That's really what's going on in Job's mind. And he's even saying to God, perhaps, you're punishing me too much. Everything that's going on here is too much. I'm not this strong, God. Now, in chapter 6, things start to get heated. And they're just going to keep getting heated between Job and his friends. And this pattern goes throughout the rest of the book. Poetry is a huge part of this book. Job uses natural experiences to insult his friends. He uses metaphor in the conversation for something. We see both sides of the debate doing this. We'll see so-and-so point to this animal or this creature. We'll see Job do that also. We'll see a lot of analogies going on. And you've got to admit that sometimes these analogies are hard to follow because not only is it an analogy, it's also a poetic analogy. Chapter 7, it's kind of interesting. Verses 24 and 25, teach me, show me. Truth may be painful, but if your argument is sound, it should be able to teach. Now, who's Job speaking to? Is he still speaking to his friends, or is he speaking to God at this point? I like what Job says here, though, because I do have to think about that in my own life. When you come to me and want to say something to me, if your words are true, then they're probably something I need to hear, right? Is it hard to hear the truth about yourself sometimes? It's very hard to hear the truth about yourself sometimes, huh? And Job here, though, is putting himself in a bit of a humble state. And that's another thing that I think we should be willing to. Did I make a mistake on the notes? Oh, okay, my bad on that. So that should be chapter 6, not chapter 7. More than 3 people are like looking at their notes going, wait a minute, something's wrong here. So, see, it's hard when you point out my mistakes. But when they're true mistakes, they have to be pointed out. That was good timing on that, wasn't it? Okay, with that, we now move to Bildad. Bildad speaks. Does God pervert justice, or does God do what's right? Once again, if somebody was to just ask you that, does God pervert justice? You're immediately going to say no. Or will the God of all the earth do what's right? You're immediately going to answer yes. So once again, we have to get past the rhetorical questions. We have to identify them as a rhetorical question, and then we have to hear the thought behind it, and especially how this person develops it. What Bildad assumes, answers, and implies. What is our answer in the case, and how does it affect our implications? Once again, Bildad, like the others, has made some assumptions. He's figured out the way the world works. Once again, we have to ask ourselves, are his assumptions right? Once again, we have to put ourselves in Bildad's shoes then and ask ourselves the same thing. Can we agree with Bildad? God's acts are always just. That's something that's coming from Bildad. Bildad doesn't for one moment think that God could ever be unjust. People get what they deserve. Chapter 8, verse 4. Since God acted in delivering Job's children to death, they must have sinned. That's a pretty out there statement, huh? He's not pulling any punches with something like that, huh? This suffering happened, and this suffering happened because it was deserved. Wow. His knowledge comes from generations past. Chapter 8, verses 8 through 10. Seek God, be pure and upright, and God will restore you. There's a little bit of an if to this, and that if makes the assumption then that it's not. You are not seeking God. You are not pure and upright in God's sight. And if you would do this, then God wouldn't do these things to you. Is Bildad's assumption right in Job's case? No. Remember chapter 1, chapter 2. We know that Bildad's assumption isn't true. If Bildad's assumption in Job's case is not right, should we use his assumption? No. This is why we have guidelines in investigations. This is why we have courts and doctors and authorities. This is why we have reasoning and arguments, right? How many of you want to go back to times before people figured out how to investigate a crime, how to interview witnesses, how to investigate medical issues and so forth, right? Remember, the first doctor who ever suggested there might be something living on your hands, so maybe we should wash our hands, he actually was laughed out of the medical community, right? Today, I tell you, you might have little bugs, bacteria, gross things. Bugs might not be the right word, but when we talk to little kids, we describe them as bugs, don't we? And you have to wash your hands and get rid of them before you eat your food and so forth, right? It's the same way. Today we have rules when it comes to how we determine things, how we decide if so-and-so is guilty or is not guilty, things of that nature. Once again, Bildad has made some huge assumptions, and I don't think that we can join Bildad in those assumptions. Job replies, chapters 9 and 10. Does Job speak what's right? Specifically verses 3 through 12 or 13. Once again, that's one of those times that I don't know where his thought ends or his thought begins. And you might think for a moment, well, Ozzy, why don't we read this passage and so forth? Well, the problem with that is we have so many passages to get through, and that's why I gave you notes. These are some things for you to later go back and ask yourself, when you read that, is Job right? There's very little there that's not orthodox in the sense that that's what the Christian church has always said or always believed. Though Job, through Job speaking, Job speaking right, he views God as malevolent or not but benevolent. Why did I set myself up with such hard words to say in front of people? Job's words here, though, treat God as if God's a mean God. God's a bad God. He's looking at God as a punisher, as a judge, or something of that nature. Many of Job's words are confirmed by God. Do some modern theologies make some of the same mistakes that Job makes? Is it a hard concept that we've already stumbled over to understand that God's in control of all things, and yet bad things happen? Is that a hard thing to wrap our head around? Is it something that's challenging to us? One way out of this could be to take control away from God. We can just say God's not in control of all things, right? I mean, that would solve the problem. Is that true though? Is that biblical though? So there are some popular theologies these days, though, that want that. They want to say that God's not in control of all things. He's actively participating. God doesn't know the future. God's with us here in time, and He's working it out the same way you and I are working it out. Does that match what the Bible says? So if your answer answers the question but doesn't match what the Bible says, is your answer right? No. Does Job's modern thoughts? God doesn't know what it is to be human. It's not easy. How many people have ever thought that about God? God, you get to sit up there in heaven all day long with angels, all day long singing about how holy you are. We have to be down here on earth. We have to work under the sun. We have to work under unfavorable conditions. We have to do all these things. God, you don't know what it's like to be human. You've never experienced all of these things. That's Job's assumption here. That makes the incarnation, that makes Jesus Christ coming in the flesh and experiencing life so important to Christian theology, huh? Did Jesus, when He came down here, did He use His God powers to make sure He was born in a nice hospital there in Bethlehem? Did He use His God powers to make sure that Joseph and Mary lived on the right side of town in a mansion? Did Jesus use His God powers to make sure everything went right every day of His life? No. Jesus experienced many of the same things that we experienced, didn't He? He got hungry, He got tired, He got frustrated. Jesus got frustrated a lot, didn't He? Jesus got betrayed by His friends. Jesus got misunderstood by those who should be understanding Him. Do we experience that? Anyways, I give you a reference here to a poem. It's called The Sign of Jonah. I actually read it once here. I just wanted to give you that so that you can Google it. It's available online. I think it's a powerful thing when it comes to understanding the incarnation. And I think it challenges Job's views here of Job saying to God, you have it so easy. Men have it so hard. Job also goes on to ask this question, and I appreciate that he asks this question. Did God create us just to punish us? Did God create us just to have fun being this... have you ever heard somebody compare God to a boy with a magnifying glass and we're all ants? You've ever heard of that? That's a bit of Job's question here. Is that what's going on? Job cannot reconcile God's blessings with his misfortunes. That's Job's struggle at this point. That's where Job has entered into his theology. How could God have been good, and how could God now be bad? That's what Job is dealing with. That's what Job is going through. Are his friends helping or hindering this? Now, verse 21, I believe this is chapter 10, verse 21 and 22. We get this little bit of a hint. Is Job's theology changing? Is he speaking about a pre-resurrection theology? That is, Jesus hasn't come yet, so we don't have the Jesus resurrection theology. The resurrections that we see in the Old Testament, Elijah and Elisha and so forth, they haven't happened yet. And in fact, at this point in Israelite theology, we don't have an afterlife. But here, Job is beginning to muse. Job is beginning to ask some very good questions. Zophar speaks. Zophar continues the idea, you have sinned, wickedness dwells amongst you. He's not wrong that God has secrets. Now this is something, this is a time that I'm reading Zophar here in chapter 11. And Zophar does claim that there are things we don't know. He's saying that amongst his little circle right there. Everybody's sitting there. He's saying God has secrets we don't know. And I'm saying that that's still true to this day. God has secrets that we don't know. And in fact, that actually is Bible. Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 29. The things I have given you are for you and your children, but the secret things are mine, saith the Lord. There's what's called negative theology. Negative theology is actually a hard and it's a multifaceted thing. But for our purposes today, negative theology is the things that we can't say. We don't know what to say. We don't know how to say them. And natural theology, going back to Paul and New Testament theology, Paul believes that there's a natural theology that points to God. He mentions it in, our first reference is in Psalms chapter 19. The heavens declare the glory of the Lord, and the earth declare His majesty, and so forth. Acts chapter 14, verses 15 through 18. This is where Paul is preaching there in Athens before the Areopagus, and he's saying that creation points to a God. And then, of course, in Romans chapter 1, which we already touched on. And there we look for some theistic proofs. Now, the thing about a theistic proof is it's a little bit of a slight misnomer. Does anybody here know an absolutely airtight argument for the existence of God? No. There are some good arguments for the existence of God. The teleological argument, that is to say, we look at how balanced everything is here on planet Earth. And planet Earth just happens to be balanced in such a way that allows life to be here. Well, how did that happen? And there are some other arguments. Do they prove God in the sense that that's it, case closed, end of discussion? No, but do they help? Do they point in that direction? I think so, and we call that natural theology. Special revelation. Throughout the entire Bible, how many times does it say, and God spoke, God said, things of that nature? And here is a good question. Can God communicate propositional truth? Propositional truth being a truth statement that is either true or it's false. Can God communicate that? How you answer that question is going to be incredibly important to your theology. And your theology is then going to dictate how you live your life, right? So there's that question. Can God communicate propositional truth? I would say yes. I would say we have to say yes to that. I would say that if we say no to that, we're going to paint ourselves into a very dangerous corner. Because it would be inconsistent to claim both. For example, how many of you like Jesus' love stuff? How many of you like Jesus' forgiveness stuff? How many of you like Jesus' mercy stuff? That's some good stuff, isn't it? How many of you like the New Testament judgment stuff? How many of you like the Old Testament judgment stuff? How many of you like those kind of passages? Are we free to kind of ignore those passages that we don't like. But we can accept those passages that we do like. There's this great passage in 1 John. This great passage in 1 John says that God is love. I like that passage. That's a good passage. And between you and me, I believe that that's a propositional truth that is also true. But there are other passages that make the same formula statement. The Lord is something. The Lord is holy. That's a propositional truth. Holy in that sense would be completely removed, different, unique. Is that propositional truth true? Are we free to affirm one propositional truth and deny another propositional truth of Scripture? Probably shouldn't. That's probably getting into some dangerous territory, isn't it? Well, that's one of the problems, though, with Zophar's negative theology. His negative theology is almost to the extent that we can't make propositional truths about God. But wait a minute, he makes propositional truths about God, including that God is always just. So his theology is a little bit self-defeating, and we need to be on the lookout for that. Now again, I have to absolutely affirm there's mystery. I have to absolutely tell you there's things about God that we don't know because he didn't include it. If he had included it, then I would tell you it's truth. But he didn't include it, so I can't tell you if it's truth or not. Right? That just makes sense, right? We are getting down there on time. Let's see how we can do. Zophar represents claims that are orthodox. He claims that repentance will lead to all blessings. He relies on that on the premise that all suffering is the result of sin. So once again, there we see in Zophar some things that do match Orthodox theology, but we see some things that don't match Orthodox theology. There we are. I pointed out that since he makes both statements, they're self-refuting. And that's the problem with some negative theology, is that we can't get too far into negative theology and ignore that God has made statements about himself. Once again, what would it be like to see God? Well, I can point you to a few passages in the Bible that give you some answer to that question. But I absolutely cannot tell you what exactly would your eyes see if you saw God. What was it for somebody to hear God? Did they hear an audible voice that if I had gotten to stand there too, I would hear that voice too? I don't know, Those are some of those questions that we have to wrestle with. We have to struggle with. Job, chapters 12 through 14. Job agrees with God's greatness. Now, so far the two friends have pointed a lot to God's greatness. And when they point to God's greatness, I have to agree with them. But Job, like his friends, makes certain assumptions. One of the assumptions that Job is going to make in this cycle of speech is that God's use of power is arbitrary. Job recognizes that God is all-powerful, but he has this thought here in these chapters that God doesn't know how to use his power, though. That's kind of dangerous theology, isn't it? We're getting into some hard things there. Now Job wants to do something. I don't recommend doing this. Job wants to call God to court. How many of you have ever received a summons to report to court? How many of you know that you don't just get to issue God a demand that you'll show up at court on this day at this time? God's going to turn the tables on Job. Once again, the book is poetry, and you've got to see that. Remember when God shows up, he says, Job, put on your big boy pants. I'm going to interrogate you, and you're going to answer me. What if Job had used nicer words, hadn't said, I'm going to take God to court? Would God have then used language like, no, I'm going to take you to court? Job chapter 13, verse 15. This is a terrific verse. It's one of those hard verses to translate, and it's one of those verses that your translation is going to interpret. And the question here is this a statement of hope or not? Though he slay me, yet will I praise him. You can see the positive side of that, but you can also see a bit of a what other choice do I have, though, in it? You know? So that's one of those... once again, I believe that there's ambiguity in the text on purpose. We have to read that. We have to struggle with that. Though God slay you, will you still praise him? Remember Satan's original question? Of course Job fears you, because you've taken care of him. Right now, for the rest of your life, God will never, ever, 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 ever do anything good for you again. As of right now, you all are off the good list if God was Santa Claus. I'm not saying God is Santa Claus. Is God still God? Are you still going to be subject to God? Are you still going to pray? You don't get anything out of it from now on. Are you still on God's side? Keeping in mind, remember, they don't have a theology about heaven. They don't have a theology that God will one day make everything good, everything right, and everything will be set fine. But from this point on, though he slay me, yet will I praise him. Job also points out that life is brief.
He's still recognizing the sovereignty. And if you've had experience where everything was bad, and you can say that, that's what he wants.
I agree. I agree that we should read this in the positive. The problem is that the Hebrew doesn't make it clear that it's in the positive, and that's why it comes back to you and me wrestling, struggling our way through the book of Job, fighting our way through the book of Job, and asking ourselves this question. Though God slay me, yet will I praise him. And with that, we have reached the end of our time. We do still have quite a bit of material to get through. What do we want to do? Do we want to hit the pause button and pick this up again next time?
Yes.
Hey all, Pastor Ozzy here. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you found it helpful, feel free to share it. And if you want more, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and you'll be notified when new videos are available. Again, thank you so much.